Folks, meet the world's most beautiful Android smartphone, the Essential phone. Now, some of you might argue against that for certain reasons, and I totally get that, but there's no denying the fact that the company has pushed boundaries when it comes to smartphone engineering with their first device. Now, don't get me wrong, there were a lot of issues with the Essential phone since launch, but gradual, software updates have addressed some of them, but not all of them. And given how it's been through a major price shift recently, should you still consider one in 2018? Let's find out, but first, a quick message from our sponsor.
Experience every pixel with the GeForce GTX 1080 Ti and enjoy these awesome new games in full 4K resolution at over 60 frames per second and get Destiny 2 for free for a limited time. Full details in the description below.
Alright guys, let's get something straight. The Essential phone screams minimalism all over its design, and I love it. The titanium construction throughout the body practically means that it can resist dents, scratches, and bending unlike aluminum. The result is a durable smartphone that's also quite heavy to hold in the hand. Now be mindful that the rear side of the phone can pick up grease and fingerprints easily, so a skin or case is highly recommended if you need some more grip. Essential has also made a few accessories that simply click onto the phone via this proprietary magnetic connector. For instance, there is this 360-degree 4K camera module that just snaps onto the device, and the connectors take charge of transferring the data. Although be mindful that the camera app tends to crash sometimes after attaching the module. It only happens say once in 3 times when you're using the module. You'll also find the fingerprint reader at the back that's easier to reach, but it takes a few seconds to unlock the device. It's honestly not a huge deal, but that's something I noticed instantly coming from the Pixel 2. I also noticed that the power and volume buttons were placed at an odd location. Personally, I'd much rather have them flipped, so power at the top and volume at the bottom, but that could just be me. The Essential phone doesn't come with a headphone jack, but they have included a Type-C to 3.5mm adapter. The phone also doesn't support wireless charging, which makes sense since it's pretty complex to pass current through the robust titanium body, but Essential is working on a dock that would use the magnetic connectors to charge the device. I guess you could call that wireless, but I don't know. What are your thoughts on that? Let us know in the comments down below. Be mindful that the phone doesn't come with any water resistant rating either, so I would take extra precaution when handling the device, especially outdoors. Now, glancing at the specs of the Essential phone, they are right on par with what competitors offer. So we've got a Snapdragon 835 CPU, 4 gigs of RAM, 120 gigabytes of storage that unfortunately cannot be expanded, a 3000 mAh battery, 5.7-inch display, which is QHD, and it runs Android 7.1.1 as of making this video. Now, while the price point might seem a little compelling for some users out there, one great example or one great alternative to the Essential phone would be the OnePlus 5T, because it offers better specs than this, and of course it comes with a lot of software related features, which is pretty awesome, and you can check out our full review right over here. Moving on to the display, it sports a 5.7-inch IPS LCD panel sporting a QHD resolution with an 85% screen to body ratio, and boy does it look so good, physically that is. Sure, the top notch with the front-facing cutout could be a distracting element for some users, but I got used to it right away. At least it isn't as bad as the iPhone X, that's for sure. Now, given that this is an IPS display, viewing angles are great. There's a good contrast ratio, albeit not as good as AMOLED panels, so if you're someone who's looking for the deepest blacks, or if you just want colors to pop, you might not be that pleased with the color rendition on the Essential phone. Unfortunately, the screen lacks brightness output, meaning even at max setting, it doesn't do justice using the device outdoors. Here's an interesting comparison to Google's offering. The max brightness setting on the Essential phone is roughly the medium setting on the Pixel 2, and that's kind of disappointing. Now, one major concern that I had with this device was the terrible screen jitter, or scroll lag, if you want to call it that way. It was very noticeable when scrolling through menus and apps. There's a good amount of lag, which really killed the user experience, and that just didn't make any sense given that the phone featured a Snapdragon 835 flagship CPU. Now, obviously it doesn't explain everything because it could be a communication issue with the screen and the software, but honestly, that's just not acceptable for $500. I mean, phones like the LG G6 do much better at that, yet they cost less. The screen jitter also affects content consumption just a bit, especially when you're watching fast-paced visuals. Again, this all comes down to software and hardware optimization, and Essential has yet to fix this major issue. But they are looking into addressing it with an update very soon, hopefully. Until then, I would stay away from this device. Essential played it safe this time by preloading the phone with a cleaner version of Android. So for those of you who prefer stock Android, this should feel like home. There are no custom launchers or any bloatware applications installed, which is highly appreciated. Now, with the type of making this video, the phone is running on Android 7.1.1 Nougat and awaiting the 8.0 Oreo update. And as mentioned earlier, Essential has promised that they'll be addressing the issues in that update. And I actually appreciate the fact that the company is transparent about these problems. And that's all thanks to the AMA Reddit session that they have open for their customers. It's a great way to interact with the company, and I'm hoping that they'll continue to open these discussions in the future. Do note that you are getting a cleaner version of Android, meaning that there aren't any unique features added to the device to elevate the user experience. For instance, you don't get the squeeze to activate Google Assistant feature that's found on the Pixel 2, which quite frankly, I did miss. Speaking of missing out, if you didn't catch our OnePlus 5T review, make sure you do so, as Dimitri spends a good amount of time talking about the amazing software features built into that device. Seriously, it's far superior to the Essential phone, especially since they both cost the same, and I'm kind of disappointed that Essential just took it plain this time without adding any productivity enhancing features within the OS. The battery life is respectable on the Essential phone. It features a 3000 mAh battery and it charges via USB Type-C. It doesn't support Qualcomm's Quick Charge protocol, but Essential has included rapid charging. It's just not as quick as Quick Charge. That's something to keep in mind. I go roughly 4 to 4.5 hours of screen on time, in some cases only 3.5, and that's under heavy usage, which involves content consumption, checking my social media accounts, emailing, etc. Now, screen on times aren't the best way to describe battery life because it all comes down to usage. But in my case, it kind of makes sense because I can compare the Essential phone to the Pixel 2 that I've been using before this guy. So normal usage would get me roughly 4.5 to 5, maybe even 5.5 hours of screen on time on the Pixel 2. But with the Essential phone, it's much lower than that. And that makes sense because the CPU has a lot to process in terms of, the much higher resolution display. And of course, optimizations. They play a huge role when it comes to battery life. So don't expect 2-day battery life out of this guy. Just don't. And the last thing to discuss here is the camera performance. So there are two 13 megapixel sensors with an f1.9 aperture. One shoots color and the other one shoots monochrome. This was done to capture more light in order to retain the detail in the shadows, and theoretically, that would result in better low light photos. But that's not the case. As you can see, you lose quite a lot of detail in those scenarios, even with HDR turned on. As for brighter scenes, the camera captures good dynamic range, but the color seems a bit washed out, and in some cases, the highlights are just blown off. Essential has also included portrait mode, and it works really well outdoors with proper lighting and exposure. But again, it doesn't do justice in low light. But I'd love to hear your thoughts on the results down below. Now, before I get to the rest of the samples, I need to mention that the camera app experience on the Essential phone is absolutely the worst. Not really sure who designed the app, but quite frankly, this is not something that I would expect on a smartphone that costs $500. As you can see, there are very limited options when it comes to adjusting the settings on the app. You don't have the option to add grid lines to help you compose shots, and that was kind of disappointing. Most importantly, you can't toggle between different frame rates. So for instance, you don't have the option to shoot at 4K at 24 frames per second or even 1080p at 24 frames per second. The only options you have is 4K and 2K, HD, and 60p, which is disappointing. I wish they gave us more options to play around with video resolutions. And here's the worst part. I normally shoot everything in HDR and leave everything else in auto, which is what I did with the shots that you're about to see. Every time when I go back to the app, it automatically disables HDR. So I'm not sure why it does that. It resets back to HDR, turns on flash automatically. So it feels like the camera's fighting back with me rather than me trying to adjust it the way I like. So overall, pretty frustrating experience with the app. I'm sure you can download third-party camera applications and, solve all of these issues, but that's just something you'll have to live with until they actually fix that problem with an update, hopefully. All right, let's go back to the samples. this is the video test on the Essential phone, currently shooting in 4K at 30 frames per second. And as you can see, there aren't any image stabilizations built inside, so the video is quite jerky when you're walking. So if you're thinking of doing any fast or just motion related stuff, you should probably avoid this phone. The dynamic range is pretty good. I wouldn't say it's the best, but it's obviously not on par with the OnePlus 5T because that phone costs exactly the same. And here's a quick test of the autofocus. It works pretty well, I mean, but you can also test the detail on the video. It's, again, not the best as I would say, but man, I'm pretty disappointed with the video on the Essential phone, to be honest. So I guess it's about time to conclude my thoughts on the Essential phone. And guys, I really wanted to like this device when it arrived here in the studio. I was ready to throw away my Pixel 2 and switch to this guy immediately, which I did. But things like the scroll lag and just the terrible performance on the device, plus the shorter battery life, the camera performance, they're all kind of meh. The software experience was also not the best, given how I was going through the screen jitter issues that I mentioned earlier. It just killed the experience. I was not really pleased by the performance of the Essential phone. On the other hand, the design on the smartphone is absolutely breathtaking. It's seriously right on par with the iPhone X if you were to ask me. But of course, this is Essential's first smartphone and they have a lot to work on. They're continually working on updates to fix issues with this device, and I'm hoping that they will with the upcoming 8.0 update. Perhaps I'll make a follow-up video with that update running, and I'll talk about whether or not if it's actually addressed some of those issues. But as of right now, I think you should completely avoid this smartphone because I still feel like the OnePlus 5T offers a lot of features for its price when compared to this guy. Because sure, it's running a stock cleaner version of Android, but the hardware and software optimizations aren't quite to the level as I would expect it to be. So yeah, just avoid the Essential phone. Well, that's it from me. Thank you so much for watching. I'd love to hear your thoughts on the Essential phone. Is it worth its price? Would you actually consider this over the OnePlus 5T? And are you willing to take the compromise that I mentioned above, like the lack of a headphone jack or the screen issues that I mentioned earlier? And of course, what do you think about the camera performance? Does it do well in portrait mode, and how do you see that comparing against the Pixel 2 and the other smartphones or the rest of the flagship smartphones? Let us know in the comments down below. I'm Ibar with Hardware Canucks. Thank you so much for watching, and we'll see you in the next one.